Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range with a rifle I keep getting requests to talk about. The rifle I brought out this afternoon is another one of my guns from the 80s, and this is the IMI Israeli Galil rifle. It's chambered in 5.56 or 223, and this weapon was used by the IDF. It was designed in the 1970s. It was designed to be the primary issued rifle of the IDF or Israeli Defense Forces. However, as time rolled on, the M16 kind of stole its glory because the United States government gave Israel a whole bunch of free M16s and kind of pushed this weapon onto the back burner of the IDF's radar. But the primary weapon later became, of course, the M16. Now, as fast forward a little bit further, in the M16 started to be replaced by another domestically produced weapon, the IWI, Tavor, and X95, and that transformation started in the early 2000s. So again, this weapon was designed in the 1970s, and I think you'll agree it closely resembles another rifle from history that we all here at the Military Arms Channel know quite well, and that's the AK-47. But it also has some very interesting design nuances from a Finnish company and some of their products. We'll talk about that this afternoon as well. So anyway, let's do a little bit of shooting with the Galil, kill a few more mosquitoes, our state bird, and talk about this interesting weapon from the 80s, which sadly is no longer in production. However, the revised version, the Ace, will soon appear on the U.S. market as a rifle, first in 7.62x39, then 308, then 5.56. Okay, let's shoot this bad boy. All right, guys, let's get the serious stuff out of the way. There's a couple of questions I need to answer about the rifle I always get asked. First of all, does the gun accept Glock magazines? And the answer to that question is no. The Galil does not accept Glock magazines. Now, if I could go back in time and talk to Israel Galil about his contraption here, I would have advised him in the 70s that, hey, man, you really need to take into consideration that in a decade or so, Glocks are going to be very prominent and the gun should use their magazines. But I don't have a time machine, and so I can't fix that wrong in history. Secondly, you guys are probably wondering right now, how does the gun fire 80s style from the hip? Well, let's find out. Oh yeah, it works just fine from the hip. Oh man, I forgot a corny 80s action movie line. Dang it! Let's talk about some of the features of the Galil and then also talk about the fire controls. Let's just start off with the rear of the gun. Work our way forward, seems logical. So with the rear, we have a side folding stock, which is borrowed directly from the FNFAL, the 5063 specifically. Notice the hinge mechanism here. It's very similar. It locks itself up nice and tight. Even as it wears, it continues to lock itself nice and tight. All you have to do to break the stock loose is pull down and rotate it to the side, and it stays in the folded position. Okay, but it's not locked. If you just grab it and pull, it'll extend itself really easily. The rear sights on the Galil are mounted to the dust cover. They're very rigid. They move ever so slightly, and this is an old gun and still has almost no play in it whatsoever. You'll notice it has an aperture style sight that can be flipped over for different ranges. But it also has night sights, which sadly on this rifle have long since expired, on the rear. Okay, there's tritium inserts on either side. It has standard AK, let me flip this around one more time, AK type fire controls. This is a semi-automatic rifle, so it just has safe and fire. If it were full auto, it would have one more position. Now here's where the Galil gets a little bit different, is right here. It has a selector lever that allows you to push it or pull it. Let's see, which way do I have it here? You can push it forward and that'll pop the safety off, or pull it back and it'll pop the safety on. You can see what happens on the other side of the rifle when I do the same thing. See how the safety goes off and goes back on? So you can do that very easily with your thumb. Now keep in mind this rifle was designed primarily for right-handed shooters. So that control is only on the left-hand side for the shooter's right thumb. If you want to charge the weapon, you got to take it off safe. You'll see this large upturned charging handle. That's so you can just run your hand over the top of the gun. Kind a nice touch. It keeps you from having doing the roll like this, which I still try to do when I shoot the Galil because I'm so used to the AK-47. But you can quite easily just run the gun by running your hand over the top of it like that. The magazine release is a bit extended. Again, it favors right-handed shooters. You'll see how it sticks out. That little tab sticks out. Doesn't do that on the other side, right? So again, they just kind of left the lefties out in the woods there. But that makes it easy, so you can just reach up with your finger and push forward and strip the magazine out. And sometimes if you shake it, you can get the magazine to fall free all on its own. You can see the heat shield on the front handguard there. Gas tube, and then up to your front sights, which are adjustable for windage and elevation. With the tool to the top there for elevation, then you can have screws on the side here to move it left and right. It also features a flip-up night sight, which once again has long since expired. And then you have a standard muzzle device on the end there, and that would be pretty much standard fare for the Galil, although there were, I believe, at least 2 different versions of the muzzle device. So one thing that's unique about this rifle is that you'll notice it has the provisions here for a bipod, which would be known as the ARM. This is an AR. This is also an early import, and this rifle has never had the bipod mounted to it. If you look closely, you'll see absolutely zero wear anywhere near that mount. All right, so they never mounted the bipod to this rifle. It never had the bipod handguards that would allow the bipod to fold into them. It was just quickly put together and brought to the U.S. market and sold in this configuration, which makes it somewhat rare. This would be an early import and a rather rare variation of the Galil. Now, they did a whole bunch of different things, slight little differences throughout the entire product line while the gun was being imported into the U.S., this being one of the many different nuances. And that's pretty much it. That's everything about the Galil, aside from field stripping it, which we'll do a little bit later. Loading the gun, which it fires from 35-round magazines, steel magazines. It's just like loading an AK. All right, you want to make sure you take the safety off and then charge the weapon. And keep in mind, this gun is not a light rifle. It seems like the Israelis don't have an aversion to weight like we do over here in the U.S. This gun tips the scales unloaded right around 9 pounds. Even the Galil, not just the Galil, but even the Tavor and the X95 are not lightweights, even though they're made mostly of polymer, at least the external components are. The guns are still quite heavy for contemporary designs. But that weight makes the gun extremely controllable. All right, so let's do a little bit of shooting with the Galil and see if I can show you just how controllable the rifle is. I think that pretty much conveys how controllable the rifle is. It's a real pleasure to shoot. So, and the trigger pull's nice and light. The trigger contour lends itself to pulling the trigger rather quickly. Just a really, really sweet rifle to shoot. Let's field strip the Galil and take a look inside. And I think you'll agree that this is easily classified as an AK variant, despite the fact that no Russian-made, Bulgarian-made, or Chinese-made AK parts will actually fit into the rifle. I think once you take a look at the internal components, you'll agree it's definitely an AK variant, but it also borrows some design cues from another rifle, which I'll show you here in a second. To field strip the rifle, it's just like a standard AK, except it has a little bit larger tab here on the rear. You push this through the top cover, push in, lift up, and the top cover pops off. You'll notice that the stampings or the sheet metal on the top cover are very thick and rigid, and that aids in keeping that rear sight from moving around a whole bunch while using the rifle as it's mounted to that rear top cover. Inside, I think you're going to agree, it looks just like an AK. Okay, we have standard AK style recoil spring. Take that out. Looking at the trigger group. All right, I did clear the rifle before I started filming. That's just straight up AK. All right, pull the bolt and carrier out, just like that. And the two can be separated in a very familiar fashion. Again, just like the AK. Put those two back together. Now the gas tube, right here, just pulls to the rear, no levers, and just pops right off. Like the AK, there is a little rotating pin here that you can flip up and take your handguard off if you'd like to. And you can see that heat shield inside there. Okay, that's all you have to do for basic maintenance to clean the rifle. Putting it back together, just reverse the process, lay your gas tube in there, slide it forward, take your bolt and carrier. You will notice that the piston is slightly different in design than a standard AK. Take your bolt and carrier, set it in there like that, push that forward, grab your recoil spring, stick that in. Now I'm going to do a little trick here. I balance the recoil spring there on the rear like that. Now when I was in Israel, I showed this to some of the IDF guys when we were shooting their Galils, and they weren't familiar with this little trick. That's not to say it wasn't taught to the soldiers, but these guys were fairly young and they may not have actually used the Galil as a primary fighting rifle, and were primarily using the M16 or the Tavor X95. So they weren't familiar with this trick. Once you get that set in there like this, you can set the top cover on the gun very easily, and it fits pretty tight, kind of snaps into place. All right, and once you get that popped into place, now all you have to do to seat that little tab to the window there in the rear of the top cover is to simply pull the charging handle to the rear, and it pops through. It's a real thumb saver trying to push that long tab forward, hold it forward to get the top cover on and line everything up and whatnot without using that simple trick. Can be a bit challenging. We developed that trick on our own as kids in the 80s when we were playing with my buddy Mike's rifle. It was my first time I ever experienced a Galil. And again, that would have been mid to late 80s. Okay, so this rifle obviously looks like an AK-47. You'll notice it has very distinct lines, a very steep slant here in the receiver, all that good stuff. It looks very unique, right? Well, then what's this? All right, so let's talk about this rifle. This is the Valmet M76. Now, this rifle has several different variations. The M62 would be the 7.62 by 39 variation. This one is a 5.56 rifle, but it looks quite similar to the Galil. You'll notice where its rear sight's mounted. You'll notice it has the same style receiver, even though this one is stamped and the Galil's is machined. Just overall, it looks very similar. As a matter of fact, when you take it apart, you're going to find that the internal components look very similar as well. Now, the rifles were in development about the same time, and I would say that obviously the Israelis got some design inspiration from this Finnish rifle. Pop it off, pop top cover off. You'll notice it has very thick stamped sheet metal, just like the Galil, because once again it has that rear sight mounted to the top cover. Inside the M76, you're going to find a straight up AK. All right, take the recoil spring and guide rod out. It's not captive. Pull the bolt and carrier to the rear, and you'll notice that piston looks awfully familiar, right? Looks just like a Galil. The bolt and carrier come apart just like an AK. Right? And then also even the gas tube comes out in the same manner as the Galil. The folding stocks are quite different. This one has a push button lock on it, and it folds to the other side of the receiver. But there's no arguing that the Galil and the M76, M62, etc. Finnish rifles don't share some pretty darn serious design inspirations. All right, put it back together, just slide that forward just like on the Galil. Take your bolt and carrier. Get in there, you little stinker. These rifles don't have as much play in them as AKs do. Check your recoil spring. Now this has more of a conventional tab on it like an AK, so I can get it back together without having to do that little trick I showed you on the Galil. All right, put your top cover on and just give it a tap with the palm of your hand and it's back together. So I would say that the M76 is quite similar to the Galil in terms of overall function. It does not have the safety lever here on the side of the receiver. It operates just like an AK, meaning all the fire controls are right here. But overall, you can't argue these two are pretty much brothers from a different mother. My rifle, of course, is an import from the 80s, and it was manufactured in Israel, but there were also USA-made clones. These clones were built using US-made receivers and Israeli parts kits from old surplus rifles that were cut up. Also, the South Africans manufactured the rifle under license, as did a couple of other countries. The South African version was known as the R4. Now, one of the most prominent clones would be the Galil, which was manufactured by Century Arms. And I've handled the Galil rifles in the past and shot them, and they were of pretty decent quality. I wouldn't say that they rose to the quality of the original Israeli-made guns, but they are a pretty good knockoff and certainly an alternative even to this day, even though they're out of production on places like Gunbroker if you want to pick a used one up. Rifles like this in good shape are going to cost you anywhere between $3,500 to $4,000, and a Galil will cost you a fraction of that. I haven't checked on their prices lately, but they're out there, they're available, and they're not horridly expensive. Magazines are also still commonly available for the Galil, these 35-rounder steel magazines. They'll all be military contract mags, and I've never had a problem with any of them. You can see that these are contract mags. This isn't a magazine that shipped with the gun originally. Running the Galil is much like running an AK. All the fire controls, with the exception of the safety, are the same. And when I say the exception of the safety, of course we have this option here that a standard AK won't have. Running the bolt is just like an AK. You also have the option of using the safety just like an AK, so you can carry the rifle with your hand on the select lever fire and put it back on safe, if that's how you prefer to run the rifle. So anyway, we're going to shoot the gun just a little bit and show you how familiar it should be to those of you out there in the AK community. So, as you can see, the rifle runs just like a standard AK. The recoil impulse on this rifle in 5.56 is almost non-existent. I would say it's every bit as smooth shooting as an AR-15. If you're looking for the ultimate in AKs, picking up a Galil, or if you can afford an original IMI Galil, certainly would be a nice addition to your collection. I'd really like to pick up an ARM, the version of this rifle with the folding bipod carrying handle and stuff like that. It's a squad automatic. They also made them in 308 originally. So there are a couple of different variations out there, but again, at current market prices, you almost have to be Bill Gates to put together an entire collection if you don't already have the rifles in your collection. This afternoon, I'm using some different ammunition. I'm using some Freedom munitions, 55 grain, 223 in these little 50-round boxes. Okay, so the M76. I know you guys are probably thinking, Mac's never going to get around to showing us this rifle in more detail or shooting it. Wrong! I won't forget about you guys. So here is the M76. Yes, this is a Galil video, and yes, I'm getting off in the weeds, but I really love this rifle, and I want to show it off a little bit. So as I showed you earlier, the stock folds to the opposite side of the Galil. But it also has one thing I didn't point out, the exact same mag release, in that it favors those right-handed shooters. So really, a lot of the stuff on this rifle is very, very similar to the Galil. Sadly, they don't use the same magazines. Now, these Valmet magazines, I should say, do not work with the Galil, nor do the Galils work with the Valmet. And the Valmet's magazines are exceedingly rare, so much so you'll oftentimes find these guns on Gunbroker for sale for $2,500 without a magazine. And then you got to go out and find a $400, $500, $600 magazine, assuming you can even find one. Now, the Galils, on the other hand, the magazines are everywhere and still relatively affordable in the $30 range or so. Not so with these rifles, so you really want to be very careful with these guns because spare parts, non-existent, magazines, almost non-existent as well. So that's why I'm not pulling parts out of the Galil, putting them in here, and vice versa to see if they actually work together because they look so similar. Don't want to break this bad boy. All right, let's shoot the M76 here a little bit and show you what it looks like. Oh, yes, sir. Man, I love my old collectibles. I don't know. I don't know if it's the muzzle device or what, but the M76 isn't quite as smooth as the Galil. It's a sweet shooting rifle, make no bones about it. But a Galil, it's not. I don't know what it is that's different. Probably the muzzle device. Anyway, such a sweet piece of history right there. Again, probably one of the nicest AKs on the market if you're looking for an AK variant that's kind of out of the norm. Downside, expensive, and magazines non-existent. If you're looking for the 7.62 by 39 version, the RK-62 or the M62, get ready to take out a bank loan. Last one I saw sell for on Gun Broker was right around $8,000. The 5.56 versions, by comparison, are relatively affordable, $2,500 to $3,000 for a decent copy like this one. So, yeah, man, the prices of guns these days. Real quick, a couple of things I didn't touch upon earlier in the video. First of all, the Galil has this little slot right here, which is a scope mount. Now, there is an original Israeli version, which I've never been able to find one to purchase one, but also companies like B Square produced mounts for the rifle in the 80s, and I don't have one of those either. Also, I've seen pictures of, but never actually used, a magazine well conversion kit that allows you to lock a magazine well conversion into the gun, much like you would the standard AK mag, and then you can insert an AR-15 magazine into that, and allows the Galil to run on standard AR-15 magazines. Again, I've never seen one, but I've seen pictures of them, so I can't comment on how well they work. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed coming out to the range with me this afternoon and taking a look at this interesting blast from the past. The Galils are no longer in production in Israel. Matter of fact, from what I was told when I was there, the tooling doesn't even exist anymore. But the good news is the product improved version of the Galil, called the Ace, is being imported into the United States. Yeah, we kind of got a false start with the 7.62 by 39 pistols, but the rifles are in the country, I believe, and we'll start shipping out to distributors here very soon. And then we'll see, and those will be in 7.62 by 39, I believe, and 308, and later, hopefully, we'll get our hands on the 5.56 versions. So, anyway, if you guys have any questions about anything you've seen in this video, you can ask those questions down below. I typically stick around for the first couple of days after a video goes live to try and answer the questions you guys may have. And if you haven't already, please swing by and check out Copper Custom. It's our online store. If you want to support the Military Arms channel, that's the best possible way. And, of course, please check out full30.com. That's full30.com. We've taken all the web's best firearms content creators and brought them under one roof, and that is full30.com. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and we will talk to you guys soon. Man, I beat this camera up. Yeah, I'm gonna break something someday.